Hello, everybody. I would like to thank you all for being here today. My name is Francesca Ricciardelli. I'm a lecturer of Italian at the University of Southern California, and I'm your moderator for this panel. I would like to thank the conference organizing committee. As we know, our times call for this type of conference, and it is an honor to chair this panel. To start, I would like to introduce Olid and Nicolas Portugal from the University of Chicago to present their research titled Addressing Gender Diversity in Romance Language Teaching and Action Plan. You will have 15 minutes, and since I don't want to interrupt you, I will do this when you only have 5 minutes left. So please look at my square if you can, or write it in the chat, but I don't want to distract you either. So whenever you would like to start, I don't see.
Hello, I'm going to be the one presenting today because Nico unfortunately couldn't make it, and I'm going to try to share my screen.
Thank you, Beth.
So that you can see.
See,
Okay,
yeah,
is that better? Yeah. Okay, thank you. So basically, the problem that we saw that was pretty serious is the problem of violence against trans and non-binary people on university campuses. This has been very well established by by campus climate surveys, and Soria analyzes a bunch of campus climate surveys and shows how this is a problem. So we decided to think about ways to improve this from our positionality as Catalan and French language instructors at the Romance Languages and Literatures Department at the University of Chicago. We could see that more and more students were identifying outside of the binary within our classes. Some colleagues were saying how they didn't have the tools to address it. They claim not to know in which ways non-binary people were referring to themselves in their languages and what were some of these non-normative uses. So we decided to create, I decided to create an exploratory teaching group on teaching non-binary language, in which the first year, 8 of us gathered, most of us from Romance languages and literatures, but others from other languages. And after the first year of sharing resources and of thinking about our teaching practices, we decided that we had already reached the colleagues who were interested in this, and that this was not enough because there were still colleagues who were not making these language practices. I'm sorry. Okay. Some colleagues were not making these language practices available. And it was important for us that all students had access to gender just language. So how could we make sure that this was something that happened? So we started thinking that the personal practices or the I don't know, good intentions of a bunch of us was a very good place to start, but that we needed some systemic change. And in that regard, we thought that it's institutions that need to change. And as members of those institutions and having those institutions as our places of work and of activism in a lot of ways, we could promote change, so that we could implement systemic changes that go beyond the superficial, I don't know, form with pronouns. Let us know your pronouns, and then you'll let your professor know your pronouns in the form, and your professor never honors those pronouns. So it's super easy to implement superficially, let me know your pronouns, but if then I don't acknowledge those pronouns in my classes and there's no action to make me honor those pronouns, then what's the use of these superficial strategies? So we thought that we needed to push our institution to go beyond those superficial practices that could create spaces of comfort and develop and implement institutional policies. So we did a literature review. I'm going to be quoting some of the people present here. I'm a little bit embarrassed about this. I hope that I quote everybody properly, and and that I don't disrepresent their ideas. So we created an action plan that has 4 steps. The first, we have so many people saying that training is important. So training would be our first step, revising the language curricula, establishing classroom norms that respect and acknowledge non-binary identities, and then creating a feedback mechanism to see how the proposed transformations have worked. And yeah.
Sorry,
So
sorry if I interrupt you, but I'm not sure we're seeing the slide that you are mentioning.
Are
Can
you
you?
saying step 1, training language instructors?
I'm seeing the whole thing. Can you go to visualization and see if maybe from there we can see the slide you're in?
Is this better?
Yes, but we still see the whole PowerPoint.
You know, when I click on presentation, I
Word.
can see the presentation, but I am assuming that you cannot.
Yeah. Sorry for
Okay, let's
interrupting.
do something else. Let me stop sharing and sharing again. And instead of just one application, I will just share the screen and see if
Perfect.
that's
Thank
better.
you. I'm sorry I interrupted you.
No, thank you for letting me know, of course.
Yes. Thank you.
Yes, is this
Yeah.
better?
Yes.
Okay, thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you for letting me know. So again, so many people say that training is essential, that we don't have representation in our materials, and that this is something that we should be doing. So obviously the step number 1 is training language instructors. We feel that this training should go together with other mandatory trainings. So for instance, I have been trained on sexual harassment prevention, and I didn't have a choice. I had to get this training as a part of my job. So I think we should not be afraid of proposing mandatory trainings. And why are mandatory trainings important? Well, again, because our allies are already training, are already thinking about this. And if we want to make these strategies available for all students, we need to make sure that all instructors are familiar with the linguistic practices that need to be, represented in the class. So I would not be scared of just creating mandatory training. And obviously this needs institutional support. At least in the institutions where we have that institutional support, and I think the University of Chicago is one of the institutions, we should push for that with no fear of just, any other training that we are getting. And then again, to push instructors to examine personal privileges and biases, because some instructors don't even know that they don't know. So again, Chris was saying earlier how some language instructors will say, my language, we don't have ways to do that. And it's like, well, you don't want to know about the ways in which people do that, or you are deslegitimizing these ways. That doesn't mean that those ways don't exist. So to at least let them know that they don't know, and to help them push themselves further in their professional development in that way. Can you see step 2?
Yes.
Okay, great. So something that also a lot of authors have stated that is important is curriculum review and materials, integrating trans and gender non-conforming representation throughout the curriculum and not only limited to specific topics. So it's not like, I don't know, Monday was Trans Day of Visibility. I did have a highlight on trans activists from the Cats and Cultural World in my class, but that was not a standalone action because I do include that trans representation throughout any topic when we're talking about anything, food, whatever. So that the representation is throughout the curriculum and not only limited to specific topics. Also pay a lot of attention, because not all representation is respectful representation or presentation that we want in our classes. And as we have more and more materials on the internet representing trans and gender nonconforming people, some of these materials are actually stereotypizing and enforcing those negative stereotypes that we don't really want to spread in our classes. And incorporating trans-affirming and queer inquiry-based pedagogies. And we feel that queer inquiry-based pedagogies and trans-affirming queer inquiry-based pedagogies are good in general for anything and for anyone that you're teaching. So I feel that some of my colleagues are a little bit shy about pushing this as if we are pushing the queer agenda. I don't feel that there's anything wrong with pushing the queer agenda. Also, I think this methodology, these pedagogies are just make up for better teaching and learning environments in general. So I would just like go to the data that actually shows this and just, accept it without being shy about it. And then the next step that we are proposing is creating safer learning environments. We don't think, so we are with Ludlow in this, that safe spaces do not really exist. And who am I to say what is a safe space and what is not a safe space? But we can create these contested spaces in which our students and ourselves can feel comfortable discussing what makes us uncomfortable. So I think that being uncomfortable is productive, and it has pushed me to evolve, to learn, to research a lot in my life. So I hope this could make the same for my students, as long as they know that there are certain rules that we can agree among the class together. So creating a class agreement on what a safer learning environment looks like could be very useful. I have done this in some of my classes, and what this looks like in the way that I do it is that at the very beginning of the class, we talk about what would make this class more comfortable for us. This is a very good experience to get to know the students, and for students to get to know each other as well. And this creates a climate of intimacy, I would say, and it's strength. Oh, sorry, my English is abandoning me today. And it strengthens, enforteix, refuerza, reinforce. It strengthens the sense of belonging to the students in the class. Again, for any student, not only for those who are marginalized, but for any student, being able to talk, pretty openly about what would make them more comfortable is something that is going to help anyone in the class. And then the feedback and improvement. Obviously, if we are establishing certain changes and we are asking people who are maybe not 100% ideologically with us there to do certain things, like taking trainings and then implementing certain linguistic practices in their classes, we should obviously get some feedback to see where the system is working and where it is not working. And this feedback should be regular. And also this feedback should allow us to do longitudinal studies on what the improvements have been like, and what are particularly successful strategies that we are using, and what are strategies that maybe we should refine a little bit more, right? This feedback should come from everyone involved. So not only from our colleagues who are teaching, but also from our students, and obviously also from the administration, who is going to be either an ally or a negative force for us to be able to implement these strategies. So I know that these are very hard times, but I would say that for hard times, we need big dreams. I know that all of the things that we are proposing, this is an article that is going to be published during this year with, more details on everything that I have very briefly summarized here. But we are aware of the fact that all of these things are not things that can accomplish by allies only or by individual will only. We need to work together with a huge community sometimes, and in a community where not everybody is going to agree. This is like no reason for us to stop trying. And again, I would say that those of us who are in situations of privilege, in which we are in institutions that are more open to certain changes, we should definitely push for that and lead the way. Let's not comply in advance. There has been some rumors about, for instance, in some departments, changing our syllabuses and suppressing some of our inclusion statements. I am not going to change anything in my syllabus until I get an official letter by someone saying you either change this or I'll fire you. Even then, I might just choose to be fired. But I'm not going to comply in advance. Just because there are rumors, I'm not going to change anything of what I'm doing. If anything, I'm going to push harder. Let's not assume that this is impossible. This is super difficult, I am aware, but we are having a meeting with our department chair at the end of this quarter to see how we can implement some of these things already for next year. So we are going to propose to the chair of the department that the training is mandatory for any language instructor in the Romance Languages and Literatures department. And we are going to, be available to help to design the training. We can help in lots of ways, but we are going to really push for this. And we are actually making it possible right now and right here. So that's something that we can be proud about. And then obviously, after the utopia that I'm talking about, we need further steps for other utopias. So the longitudinal studies, I think, are a very important point to really assess what we have been doing well and what can be better. Examine also the long-term effects of incorporating gender-just language in our teaching. So Chris was mentioning before how these metalinguistic abilities that we can help our students acquire through the reflection on how gender works in language, or how we can use language to reflect gender or to multiply gender in lots of ways. If we have longitudinal studies and these long-term effects, how this is helping, this could help our case to push for these linguistic practices to be recognized in classes, and obviously to create spaces that support intellectual growth, diversity, and equity for all students, which is what we aim for with the whole plan. And I would end by saying that my preferred pronouns are we, us, together building new words, new worlds. So that's what I hope that we can do.
Thank you so much for your contribution. This is really interesting. I will now introduce the second presenter. If you don't mind, stop sharing. Thank you. And then we will have questions at the end of the third talk. So I would like now to introduce the second presenter, Riccardo Amorati from the University of Melbourne, with a research titled Giving Voice to All, Gender-Just Pedagogies for Italian Beginners. You will again have 15 minutes. I'm pretty sure you cannot see me while you're talking.
Yeah.
Oh, no, now I'm pinned. Okay, so if I do this, it means that you have 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Can you all see my screen? Yeah, perfect. Hi, everyone, and I'm very, very happy to be here. My name is Riccardo Amorati, and I'm a lecturer in Italian studies at the University of Melbourne. In this talk, I'm going to give you some information about Italian and how gender works in Italian, but I'm also going to talk about the changes that I've made in my beginner Italian class at university. So I'll just start by giving you some information about grammatical gender. And Italian, like most other Romance languages, is based on a grammatical gender binary. So we have masculine and feminine form, and generally grammatical gender matches the gender of the people that we refer to. So the word for boy, ragazzo, is masculine. The word for girl is ragazza, is feminine. So this is not something that happens all the time. So it's possible to go beyond the binary, but it's usually what happens. Gender is also very visible. We see it in adjectives, in articles, in pronouns, some verb forms, and so on. So the issue that we have is not how the language works, but rather how it's used. So Chris mentioned earlier, the language is interaction. So a key issue in current Italian mainstream usage is the use of what we call maschile sovraesteso, overextended masculine, which is a term I really like because really gives the idea of going overboard with the masculine form. So the masculine form is generally used as a generic form, and the masculine has also been used to refer to women in prestigious male-dominated professions. So because of the way the language is used, women and non-binary people are underrepresented. And this is why there's been a lot of debate on this issue. So building on previous research, my colleague Elena Pirovano and I developed a gender-just toolkit to examine the approaches and strategies that teachers of Romance languages can use to challenge these linguistic asymmetries that I've just talked about. And I'll go over them briefly because I'm sure most of you are familiar with them. But the two approaches essentially are visibilization and neutralization. So for each approach, as you can see, we have two linguistic strategies, which are listed here from the easier to implement to the most difficult. So when we use visibilization, we want to make feminine and non-binary forms visible in a language where the masculine is dominant. So for example, in strategy 1, we use the feminine alongside the masculine instead of just the overextended masculine. And we also use the feminine form for all professional titles in the feminine, which, you know, is not a crazy idea. In strategy 4, we use innovative forms that are common in non-binary communities. And these are more difficult to implement in our classes because these forms are not standardized. So we might have many coexisting forms in use. So it's up to us as teachers to decide which ones we should actually include. The second approach is neutralization. So strategy 2 tells us to choose words that are the same for all genders. Strategy 3 instead is based on rephrasing. So we change the sentence to eliminate gender references. So we use impersonal and passive constructions, non-gendered expressions, and grammatical forms that don't make gender salient in the sentence. Then the question becomes, how can we incorporate these strategies into our teaching? And it's obviously not an easy task. We need to think about and balance many different factors. So you can see here in the figure, I just summarized the key ones that I had to deal with. First, we need to think about the student's level of knowledge. So usually at lower levels, less is more. Students may not be able to use complex inclusive forms, for example, those that require passive forms. We also need to think about clarity in communication and linguistic economy. Forms like the use of the masculine and the feminine together might be too verbose and complex to be used consistently. Another factor is time available. There are few fully developed teaching resources available for Italian and many other languages, which means that the responsibility of creating them often falls on us. We also need to be mindful of the fact that gender-just forms obviously are not mainstream. So if we only focus exclusively on desirable gender-just options, we run the risk of making students learn forms that diverge from current mainstream usage. An additional issue relates to the fact that inclusive forms, as I was saying before, are not standardized. So many different forms coexist, which means that it can be difficult to decide which form to prioritize. And finally, in some contexts, teachers need to prepare students for high-stake exams, like proficiency tests, for example, and examiners may not be familiar with inclusive forms and consider them incorrect. So when we implement inclusive language, we need to consider these different factors and mediate between them. So in a sense, we wear two hats. On the one hand, we advocate, obviously we want to advocate for inclusive language practices. On the other, we have a responsibility to make pedagogically sound choices for our students. So here you can see some principles to go by. The first one is, when we talk about gender-just language in our classes, we're obviously not rejecting traditional language forms. What we're doing is we are encouraging students to think critically about the rules that they are learning and providing them with additional linguistic options that they can choose from to express their identity or to signal a stance. So this idea of seeing gender-just forms as additional forms that they can use aligns well with the notion of linguaggio ampio, or broad language, which is a term that we use in Italy. We prefer in Italy as a replacement of the term inclusive language, or linguaggio inclusivo. So ampio, as I was saying, means broad. So the idea behind the term is that we are broadening linguistic options. We're not limiting them. We are providing additional options that people can choose from. Another principle is that we should balance clarity and ease of communication with gender-just language use. We may need to prioritize traditional forms in some contexts for pedagogical reasons, but what matters most is that we are open with our students about these decisions, and that we signal our commitment to gender justice even when we use traditional forms. So I'll now show you the work that I've been doing in my beginner course by applying the toolkit and the principles that I've talked about. And here I want to challenge the idea that many language teachers have, that introducing gender-inclusive language at beginner level is impractical because students don't know enough about the language. So I'll give you some examples of content from the first 4 weeks of my course. In the first week, as you can see on this slide, students learn about subject pronouns in Italian. So we have a slide explaining how the non-binary they is translated into Italian with an example. So we have a sentence here, è di Roma, which could mean he's from Rome, she's from Rome, the gender neutral, they are from Rome. So the language required to understand and apply this rule is very simple, but it signals that that we as teachers are taking a stance. We are opening the conversation. It's also important that when we teach grammar, we avoid conflating the notion of grammatical gender and social gender. So this figure on this slide is taken from a teaching resource, and we show students that grammatical and social gender are connected, but we also tell them that a binary grammatical system doesn't make it impossible to speak beyond the gender binary. It just makes it more difficult, but not impossible. So Italian is not intrinsically exclusionary, it's just the way it's used. And we also remind students from the very start that the main function of grammatical gender is agreement between words. That's the main role of grammatical gender. So sentences can be modified to make sure that agreement doesn't reflect a person's gender identity. In week 3, students see how this works in practice when we talk about adjective agreement. So in Italian, the ending of the adjective normally gives information about the gender of the speaker or the person being talked about or referred to. And in this teaching resource, students can choose between the masculine, the feminine, and as you can see, the gender neutral form as well. If they choose the non-binary form, they can add a gender neutral word like persona, so that the adjective agrees with persona, which is always feminine, and not with the person being talked about. And they're also told that if they're writing, they can use non-binary symbols like the Italian gender-neutral letter schwa, which is very common in non-binary communities. So the idea is that it's possible to go beyond the binary, and the language required to do it is easy to handle for beginner students. I also offer a few strategies to help non-binary and gender questioning students express their identities in Italian. The first approach, which is the ideal approach, is neutralization. So this means using gender neutral forms whenever possible. But as you can imagine, this can be quite complex, and beginner students may struggle to produce these forms consistently. So to address these challenges, I also give students two compromise options, and this is something that is discussed in a paper that I've worked with my colleague, Elena Pirovano. The first one is called random choice. So if students find neutralization strategies too difficult, they can choose a random grammatical gender for a specific task without needing to stick to it for future tasks. So the key is consistency within each task. And the last option is called implied meaning. So here, students can either use the masculine or the feminine form, but they give it a new meaning. So for example, they might choose the feminine because they are thinking of themselves as a persona or a person, which is always feminine. Or they might be using the masculine because they're thinking of themselves as an individual or an individual. So these strategies help non-binary students navigate grammatical gender in a way that suits their level of knowledge, while also preparing them for situations like proficiency exams where traditional binary structures are tested. Here you can see material that I've included to talk about the use of the masculine in Italian to refer to mixed groups. So when we present this rule in Italian and say, if there are 9 women and a man, you need to use the masculine as the generic form. And we often have students commenting on it. So this is really a way to of getting them to think critically about this linguistic practice and the implications of this practice, and show them some alternatives that they might come across. So we tell students that the use of these forms depend on the context, so they don't have to use them all the time, but they can use them to signal a stance. And we also take the opportunity at this point when we present, gender neutral forms, forms that include both the masculine and the feminine, to explain to them why we tend to greet them in a certain way. So why we say things like ciao classe, hi class, as opposed to using overextended masculine forms. I also allocate dedicated class time to discussions on gender justice. So for example, here in week 4, we examine the traditional presentation of words in dictionaries. And again, traditionally, the masculine form is considered the default. For example, when looking up the word for child in Italian, students would typically find bambino, which means male child in the masculine. And this practice obviously is problematic, but it's often presented as the way things are. And from the start, we want to make sure that these conventions, these norms are discussed. So here we tell them, for example, that some dictionaries are including both forms, and ask them to reflect on why it's important. Building on these discussions, we also ask them to reflect on the presentation of adjectives in the textbook. So as you can see here, we have a list of adjectives, and the masculine form is given as the base form. And we then give them the task to propose ways to make this presentation of adjectives more inclusive and reflective of diverse identities. So in this sense, this becomes a call to action. So they are encouraged to engage with linguistic choices from the outset, and also to consider the broader implications of linguistic norms and conventions. So to wrap up, there's a lot that we can do in our classes to promote gender justice. First of all, we can work on creating a gender-just classroom culture by modeling appropriate behaviors. And this includes, several strategies. I've just included some here. For example, using gender-just forms in greetings, like hi classroom, ciao classe, as opposed to ciao a tutti, hi everyone. And another strategy is to normalize the practice of pronoun sharing, avoiding gender stereotypes in the way we communicate and interact with students. And when it comes to curriculum integration, the goal is to provide students with additional options in situations that require a gender choice, and also obviously to ensure queer representation in our materials. At the same time, I think it's important to encourage students to reflect on the traditional linguistic norms and conventions that they are being taught. And the aim is to foster empathy, to foster social awareness, and also students' capacity to think and analyze language. To promote their metalinguistic competence. And if we think about it, the development of empathy, of social awareness, metalinguistic competence has always been a key outcome of language education. We're not really inventing anything new. We are, continuing to help students reach educational goals and allowing them also to express their identities. That's all from me. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Riccardo. This was very useful, especially for me because I teach Italian and I will still the ciao class. I would like to now introduce the third and last research of this panel. The presenters are Cody Rain from the Montessori School of Northampton and Theresa Jensen from Miller North High School. Their presentation is titled Teaching Gender-Inclusive Spanish Using Comprehensible Input. And you have, again, 15 minutes. Thank you.
Hey, hi, I'm very happy to be here. My name is Theresa Jensen, and I'm here with
Cody Rain.
Okay, and just to tell you a little bit about us, Cody, go ahead.
Okay, yeah, my name's Cody Rain, and my pronouns are they, them, and AA in Spanish. I'm an upper elementary and middle school Spanish teacher at a Montessori school. I speak, write, and teach direct gender-inclusive Spanish unless I'm code switching, because the world isn't really a safe place for gender-expansive people. I've written a couple of language learner readers in direct gender-inclusive Spanish with non-binary main characters. And first and foremost, I write books to subvert gender and queer tropes and stereotypes.
And my pronouns are she, ella. I'm a high school teacher in Omaha, Nebraska, and I've been using gender-inclusive language in my classroom for the past maybe 4 years. And yeah. All right, so just to address what exactly do we mean when we're talking about gender-inclusive Spanish. First of all, of course, gender-inclusive language is referring only to people, not to objects. And this is just something that I use in the books that I also write using gender-inclusive language. Just wraps it all up kind of in 2 little slides here. Ella, nosotres, vosotros, and ellas being the pronouns that are designated as gender inclusive. And also the endings that we use are E for non-binary individuals and also for like unknown gendered individuals, and the plural being ES. It also is pretty common in different communities to use the letter X, but it's still pronounced A. So it just becomes a little bit easier for teaching, and it becomes a little more, I believe it's more widely used in my experience. And then some of the articles being le for the, and also les, and then une and unes for a or some. and then sadre, parent, and sadres for parents. And of course, epicene words like artista or modelo remain the same. All right, and equally important, it's really perhaps more important than the actual language that we use itself, is our classroom culture, which was something that I like that both of the other sessions mentioned. And Cody is going to go ahead and address that.
Okay, so in teaching languages, we usually have specific goals like lesson plans, and then we have more generalized or higher goals like proficiency and cultural competency. The same applies to teaching gender inclusive language. We'll have specific goals like the slides that Teresa just shared, and higher goals, which for me would be creating a classroom culture that supports the human rights and dignity of gender expansive people, the equality of all genders, so not prioritizing, say, the masculine gender, and imparts the messages that gender is not a binary. There are more than two genders, and to not assume anyone's gender. I'm non-binary. It doesn't matter what I look like. It doesn't matter how I dress. We can't tell someone's gender by how they look or how they dress, what their name is, or anything else. We don't know someone's gender until they tell us. I'm really lucky to work in a school where other teachers are also working towards these higher goals regarding gender. So I can give some examples of what this classroom culture looks like. In class, we play Quiénes. That's a game where there are images. Yeah, we play Quiénes, where one player picks a character and the other player or players ask yes or no questions to try to figure out who the character is. In the rules, one of the suggested questions is, ¿es un hombre? And so I asked my 9 to 11-year-old students if we could tell the gender of the characters by looking at the images. They responded with a resounding, no, of course not. A couple of them almost seemed offended that I even asked the question. And then one of the students pointed out something else that was written in the rules that says, once a player has figured out who the opponent's character is, he can guess the character's name. For example, Es Ignacio. If the player guesses correctly, he wins. If he guesses incorrectly, he loses. And then a cisgender 9-year-old boy said, oh, that is not okay. It should say they or they/she/he. And that's the kind of classroom culture I hope to help create. And teaching gender inclusive Spanish is a huge part of that, but not the only part. We tend to think of input as applying to the target language that we're teaching, but everything we say and use in class is input. So some things you can do, which have been mentioned previously, but introduce yourself with your pronouns. This sends a message of not assuming gender. It signals to trans and non-binary students an acceptance of gender diversity. Use images on your classroom walls that break gender and heteronormative stereotypes. In choosing resources, find voices, videos, stories, famous people, songs, singers who are gender expansive or break gender and heteronormative stereotypes. Also, inclusion doesn't include hate. As a teacher, you can set the norms for your class. You do not have to tolerate hate. You can say hate has no place in your classroom. And of course, let students use the names and pronouns that represent their identities. Then use gender inclusive English if that's the common language of your students. Again, that's input. Instead of saying he or she, use they, or if you're writing, you can use they/she/he. And we use this all the time in English. It's we don't even notice. Like we say things, for example, somebody left their backpack in the classroom. I hope they come and get it. We don't say somebody left his or her backpack in the classroom. I hope he or she comes to get it. And along those same lines, instead of saying boys and girls, use children or adolescents instead of men and women, use people instead of mothers and fathers, use parents instead of brothers and sisters, use siblings, etc. And all of these options are widely accepted and can even be used if there are restrictions regarding using gender-inclusive language. And then when teaching gender-inclusive Spanish, speak and use it consistently from day one. Don't make it a separate unit. And start off every class with a greeting that is inclusive of gender-expansive students, like hola, amigas, or bienvenidas, or hola a todas. Or you could use the feminine, masculine, and gender-neutral forms together, like hola, amigas, amigas, y amigos. That sets the tone for the class, and it's also a great option for teachers who find speaking gender-inclusive Spanish throughout the entire class challenging. And then I would say also, don't worry about speaking gender-inclusive Spanish perfectly. You can model for students that you're learning and can make mistakes too. And this can help create a really comfortable learning environment where it's okay to make mistakes. And now I'm going to talk about an activity called Picture Talk, where you generate a discussion or create a story based on an image or a picture. So there are a number of ways to approach Picture Talk. One way is to just describe the picture and ask comprehension questions. So if like you or your colleagues are teaching under restrictions regarding teaching direct gender-inclusive language, a simple way to not assume anyone's gender is to use the word persona to avoid assigning gender to images of people. For example, if I was doing this with my class, I could say, hay tres personas, and then I could ask the class, ¿cuántas personas hay? Tres o cuatro? And I could continue to describe what I see in the picture and ask questions about it using the word persona for each person rather than talking about the gender of the person. Now, if you're free to use gender-inclusive Spanish, you can assign names and pronouns to the people in the picture. For example, la persona que está parada se llama Mica y su pronombre es ella. Then I'll ask the class, Mica parece contente o enojada? And then I can go to the next person, la persona que tiene pelo rojo se llama Quinn y su pronombre es ella, él. And then I can ask the class, Quinn parece contento o enojado? And then for the last person, I can say la persona al lado de la computadora se llama Sam y su pronombre es ella. Then I'll ask the class, Sam parece contenta o enojada? So I've matched the adjectives to the gender, to the pronouns of each person in the picture. And then using the gender-inclusive term for the group of people of mixed genders or unknown genders, I can say, todas están contentas o todas están enojadas. And my students love to create stories about the pictures. So I often go beyond just describing what we see and using that, use the imagination to create stories. And I might ask something like, ¿Por qué todas están contentas? And then I'll just continue to ask questions as my students create a story about what they see. And then once in the picture, and then once gender expansive culture has been established in the classroom, students themselves you can allow the students themselves to decide names and pronouns. Like when my students do that, the names and pronouns they choose seem quite random and not correlated to the status quo gender expectations at all. And then I just use the names that my students have chosen, names and pronouns that my students have chosen to ask questions about the picture or to create a story with the students about what's happening in the picture. And next, Teresa will describe another activity.
Okay, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about one-word image. If this isn't something that you've ever done before, I'm probably not going to give you enough information to be able to pull it off for your very first time, just in this little silent, like quick little moment. However, I will provide resources that will help you be able to do that. But if you've ever done story asking before, teaching proficiency through reading and storytelling, this is basically the same thing, but you're just creating a character instead of creating a whole story. It's actually really a lot easier than creating a whole story, and it's a great place to start if you've never done that before. But it provides great individuality. It creates community, and it also helps your students really take ownership of identity and just get really creative with Spanish. Here are a few examples of some one-word images that my classes have created before. Honestly, I think the Kool-Aid El Pancreas is probably one of my favorite ones that they created. It was Mussolini's pancreas, of course, because it couldn't just be a regular pancreas, but it's just a random character that your students create together. I'm going to go ahead and go to the next slide. This is basically just kind of the process of it. So you create roles for students within the class. So you choose a profe dos, a second teacher who can kind of veto or allow or break ties whenever students are choosing what it is that they want to do for that image. And then an artist as well. And your artist needs to be very careful to listen for when it's appropriate to begin drawing as the class is developing the character. The class together, I have them do this in English. It's recommended actually that they do it in English. Choose what the character is. It's not going to be a person. It's going to be something that's going to be personified. That's going to be like, anthropomorphized into an actual character. So it might be a turtle. It might be a paperclip. It might be a half-eaten taco. I mean, it could be anything. And then you decide the name and the gender of this character. What I if I this as using this to help students learn gender inclusive language, I would purposely choose and say that the character's pronouns are ella, and then go ahead and build from there. So when they have gotten that culture down, then I can allow them to choose the gender of our character, and then we could go from there. But I really like to start off with saying like, oh, wow, we have a non-binary character, and let's find out more about them. And then you would story asking style determine what their personality is like. And so once we have our, like, let's just say it is Kool-Aid El Pancreas, whose pronoun is ella, we'll go ahead and say, okay, Kool-Aid es grande o es pequeñe. Kool-Aid is big or Kool-Aid is small. And, the class, might say, oh, es pequeñe. It's they're small. And so then we'll say, oh, es pequeñe, un poco pequeñe, o es muy pequeñe, o es pequeñísime. And so then they would go ahead and choose which of those. And of course, all of those are using the non-binary endings. And they hear tons of repetitions of it. And so they start to pick it up really quickly. And of course, you don't just determine what this character is like. We're continually circling back and asking questions of the students to remember what the character is like. So once you've determined that Kool-Aid es pequeñe, es honeste, artistique, and artistic and honest, then we'll ask, oh, es Kool-Aid, like we're refreshing, es Kool-Aid pequeñe, o es grande, o es honeste o es deshoneste, o es, and so you're getting tons of repetitions, and through the input of the one-word image, the students are really picking up those endings a lot faster than they would if you were just straight reading about something, or if they were learning and where you would hear like multiple different genders. They're getting just a ton of repetitions right away. And then I like to do a write and discuss after we're finished, which basically a write and discuss is where a teacher is going to be asking the class questions and then writing, and so putting into writing and handwriting in front of the class the story that was just just told, and then the students are like copying down that story as well. And through the act of like retelling it and writing it down, it tends to really get lots of repetitions, and they end up formalizing that. I've included a number of links here. There's a slideshow that I use in front of my class to go through the one-word image. So it basically guides the students through the rules. Ben Fisher Rodriguez, you may be familiar with him. He was one of the ACTFL finalists for Teacher of the Year the year before last. And this is a blog post that he has about one-word image. Jody Stodik has, she's one of the writers for Senior Wooly. And this is a slideshow that she uses to do one-word image with her class. And then, of course, you may be familiar with Dr. Liam Printers, and he has a podcast about one-word image. And that's all we have today. I've included our websites, Cody's website and my website as well. We are writers, and we do produce a lot of books and materials using gender inclusive language. And then, of course, I included this in the chat, the link to this slideshow itself, so that you have access to all the links that we shared.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your contribution. It has been very interesting. And I'm sure we'll have learned